Yarek, Aisha, Behrad, 2 episodes every week.
Leancast, product innovation and UX design podcast.
What's up, everyone? It's Leancast, another episode, and I'm really excited for this one. I'm here with a product veteran. You heard it right. She's been in this field of product strategy management for the past 20 years almost. She is the author of a brand new book called, I will rephrase it so I don't have it top of my head, but it's about solving problems in 2 hours. When I bump into this book, I told myself I have to talk to Teresa. I'm here with Teresa Cain. She is the director of product management, user experience design at TreviPay. TreviPay is a very, very big financial instrument based in the US. If I am getting it right, has multiple branches around the world. So I see this as a crash course for myself. I have 60 minutes of in front of Teresa. So let's go. Teresa, thanks for coming on the podcast. I know your schedule is crazy busy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Teresa, I think I would do my audience a disservice if we don't start from your background, your journey, your experience journey, so to speak. How did you end up here? This is first and foremost my curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been really fortunate to spend the majority of my career in product, for almost 20 years, as you mentioned, which is pretty amazing. You talked about the book I just wrote, Solving Problems in 2 Hours. It's kind of a funny story. I actually started off in writing. I was a journalism major as well as an English major, 2 undergrad degrees, and I was writing for newspapers, and I was planning to go write for a newspaper, move out to California, do lots of different stuff in the US. And I realized there was no money in writing at that time, 20 years ago. And so it was interesting. I got my first, big role. I had several roles before at H&R Block, which is a really big tax company. I'm not sure if you guys, it's as popular over there as it is in the US, but TurboTax has a pretty large market share, I know, internationally as well. So across all their product lines owned by Intuit. So H&R Block, I started actually editing HTML for tax advice for people that were going there. And while I was there kind of doing that role, I got offered a job as a product analyst. And so that was really kind of how I got my foot in the door, was through writing and getting that job offer. And from there, kind of the rest is history. I worked on a number of products there that we're really on getting people to fill out their taxes for the year so they could get their refunds in the US. That led to kind of a number. There was also, a large mortgage crisis going on. So there was a lot of products around, mortgage and tax. And then from there, a really interesting product journey. I've kind of had the opportunity to work for multiple Fortune 100 and 500 organizations that are both based in the US and have a large international presence.
Right.
So just highlighting a couple of those that, exciting in the last 10 years. I'll skip 10 years forward, since, it's too much to go into. But really in the last 10 years, I've worked for some pretty cool platforms. So I worked for a healthcare technology organization. I was over 13 different mobile apps where, I was really working to have integrated healthcare. So that's both primary care and behavioral health care. And that was amazing. We were talking a bit about travel, you and I before this, but I was traveling around 80%, kind of all over, meeting with physicians. And really, you kind of see that history of user experience there as I chat about it. So user experience has always been a big part of my product journey, and making sure that I'm talking to customers and getting their feedback and building the right solutions. So from there, I went to a company called Service Management Group. They're a really big CX company. So customer experience platform focused on getting user feedback and generating AI feedback on that, which is really timely and hilarious because we were doing ChatGPT, basically for a long time. And now there's this front end service offering it. So that's been kind of a fun discussion with a lot of former coworkers I've had recently. But ultimately, let's talk about where I'm at now. So TreviPay. So I've been there 5 years. We are a white label global fintech invoicing solution. So while it's not as familiar as PayPal, we actually process around 6 billion in transaction volume annually internationally, all over. We've got offices in the US, but we also have international offices as well. We have several folks out in the Netherlands. We actually have a few housed in Germany as well. Dubai, Egypt. We're kind of a little bit everywhere. And really exciting. I'm over product, user experience, and design. And this method that I talk about in the book really encompasses what I have the team kind of moving towards and building user-centric designs and experiences across web and mobile.
Yeah, it's 2023, and I talk to a lot of folks, potential clients, and sometimes, to my surprise, it's still in 2023, clients both from the US, Europe. There is not an understanding, maybe a comprehensive understanding why UX can make or break it for your app, for your software business. It could be a very, very straightforward answer for you, but I would love to hear it from you, the importance of UX especially for like digital applications.
Absolutely. And I'll touch on that internationally as well. TreviPay, we actually are in 27 countries. And
Wow.
I kind of, I mentioned to you how much I travel as well. It's so important to no matter the country you're in, and especially if you're wanting to have that global presence, to really be getting that user feedback and conduct that research on the different markets. Because if you don't, and you go try to roll out a product in a new country, you might be getting some pretty negative results. And I've certainly seen that before. Actually, just more recently, we're really big on net promoter score, NPS. We have that embedded in a lot of our products and solutions. And I have a net promoter experience. I'm actually net promoter certified. I didn't touch that part of my 20-year history, but I have rolled NPS out at every organization I've been at because I just happen to have that certification and very passionate about customer feedback and taking it, for the product side, because you get so much valuable feedback. But we rolled out this NPS survey in the US and UK and Australia, which are all dominantly English speaking countries. Great, really, really great feedback on the survey. We actually ironically rolled it out to Germany, and there was a word we were using in the US along the lines of like, thanks for taking the survey, like, have a great day, type of. And in Germany, it was like, it came off of, I think that my German team said, this phrase you have ending on the survey says like, hope you had a great day. Like, it was just very like sarcastic, kind of a tone. And it wasn't something that we had, worked with the team, but it was kind of missed. And it was kind of just like a sarcastic statement that like was really unprofessional. And so we quickly had to adapt and say, okay, let's fix this before we get it in front of clients. And so those are the reasons why it's so important to get that international feedback, but all the way down at the customer level. Like, even if it means you're traveling over there or having a call, like a Zoom call or whatever, video collaboration, if you don't get that feedback, if that survey would have went out and the customer felt like we were being rude,
right.
They could have left a very negative survey feedback. So,
I don't know how to form a question around this side of your experience, but you mentioned you have managed 13 different apps. Right now, TreviPay is in 27 different countries. And every culture, every product category has its own nuances, has its own delicacies, has its own sensitivities. How do you go about coordinating all the insights that you are receiving from this market, this category, and try to align your teams. Maybe like if you could break down how your team structure, to as long as NDA and company sensitivity allows and permits, that would be fantastic actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I shared with you, I'm Italian, so I've got a really big Italian family there. So I'm very, we're just family people in general. So this is second nature to me. So in terms of how I have things organized at TreviPay and really at many other organizations I've been at, is I kind of have a liaison for each country.
Mm-hmm.
So even like a majority, I've actually got a map behind me here, so maybe I should just draw some circles here. But for Europe specifically, we have a pretty large European market of countries as part of those 6 billion in transactions. And so we cover across those 27 countries. We have someone at TreviPay that speaks at least 25 out of the 27 languages, like of the countries that we're supporting. So we have really large coverage, and we'd love that to be even higher, but it is hard. And that person, I can't just hire someone in from the product team because they speak a language. I would love to do that, honestly. Like if I had an unlimited budget, I would actually have a product manager representing from every country, because that's really what I think would be really beneficial for those markets. But you can't really do it that way. You have to look at how many users do you have of those 27 countries and where kind of are the heavier bases. Germany, for instance, actually, I have a ton of clients in Germany, and so that actually is a market that I do have someone on the team that constantly has to check and say, nope, this isn't right. There's no way they would use this function. So this is a hypothetical example because, like, to your point, I can't go completely into this feature, but we're building out this new portal for a large client in Germany, and how the users interact with the portal are very different in Germany than they interact in the US. In addition to that, you have the complexity of VAT from the fintech side, which we don't have that from a tax perspective, a different tax perspective in the US. And so ultimately, we get a lot of feedback on, this portal. So we rolled this portal out in the US and we showed it to this team in Germany, and we said, hey, what do you think? And they tore it apart. They're like, no, like even like where the accept button was on the bottom of the screen, they're like, I would never click that there. Like, I want that up in the top right. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And my representative, in Germany, her name is Helen. She is our expert across all things client, across the different areas. So we pull her in for feedback as well as others on the team. And what we did is we take that, and much like I talk about in the book, Solving Problems in 2 Hours, we run a workshop. So we'll run a workshop and we'll talk about, okay, here's the feedback we got across all these different international representatives or countries that work for TreviPay. Sometimes it's a client representative if we don't have someone from TreviPay. Like I mentioned, we can't cover every language all the time. And we do a workshop and we try to come to an 80% rule of, can we meet 80% of the needs for this solution in this country with the design that we have, or do we need to consider a more custom route specific per country? And you never want to have to customize every single thing. You want to be a little more out of the box in tech, especially these days, because when you're able to have something more out of the box, you can have updates on a more regular basis without there being an impact. So that's usually how I approach that from an international standpoint. And again, I'm just so fortunate that we have such like a tight knit international team across the board. Other than, all the shifting time zones of meetings, I mean, we do meet pretty regularly, like on a
Right.
So
I'm kind of getting to a feel for why you wrote the book 2 hour problem solving, given the context and intensity of your workload and the time zone and different people, different markets that you have to deal with. So let's slowly get right into it. So design thinking been around for quite a while, and I think every practitioner that got deep into the methodology there to introduce their own practice, their own methodology. I've been design thinking been around, say, since the early 90s, and with the IDEO, and then we fast forward, a lot of a lot of different methodology came out. 2 weeks, 3 months, da. Fast forward, design sprint, 1 week. Hey, let's bring all the folks under one roof. Cell phone out, da. Let's focus on the problem. Let's see what we can do. Prototype, test, Friday. Now, 2 hours problem solving. So, Teresa, let's just start from here. What kind of problems you saw in our practice that you realize that, okay, that's not it. We need something that is more effective, that we can get to the bottom of things in as short as 2 hours. By the way, I think you are onto something really huge. I'm a big fan of, like, hey, let's just be as effective as possible. I really think that some of these 2 days workshops, some of these 4 hour workshops are absolutely unnecessary and avoidable.
Yeah, absolutely. No, obviously, I'm a really big fan of design thinking and design sprints. So, uh, even before I implemented this shorter process of 2 hours, I had already been reducing design sprints down from the 5 day method. And, some of the challenges I experienced, I just talked about the international presence we have at TreviPay. Can you
Got it.
imagine setting up a 5 day design sprint that would include everyone from those 27 countries? It's not possible.
Impossible.
Right? We have Australia, we have UK, Germany. I mean, there is no way to do that. And I think I love that book by Jake Knapp and the team at Google Ventures. It's not very global friendly. It's not international friendly. And, let's also look at kind of what happened when I created this concept, the COVID-19 pandemic.
Oh, that's right.
So again, I was already reducing workshops. I had run probably over 25 day design sprints before I had even started reducing. I've probably run at this point probably close to 80 or 90 over the last several years.
Wow.
And before the COVID-19 pandemic, whether it was a 5 day or 2 day or 3 day design sprint, you really only did a handful of those a year at an organization. And you usually took a complex problem that you probably weren't going to work on for another 6 months. And here's the problem with that. Let's look at the shift in the market. When I started at TreviPay 5 years ago, there were maybe 5 competitors in the space of what we were doing from a B2B payments perspective. There's over 40 now in that 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And so if you just wait as an organization to solve problems twice a year, what's going to happen? Your competitor or someone else in the space is going to come up and take what you were going to do. And so the intent around solving problems in 2 hours wasn't just a response to the pandemic, but also really creating the opportunity to more efficiently get problems that were on your roadmap or ideas and get them to market faster before your competitors could take those same ideas. And when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, we were actually working on, ChatGPT, again, it's just like been a funny thing that's come up so much lately, because we were looking to solve a problem of, could there be a way to predict if someone's going to pay their bill or not? Just simple statement is that was the problem. And I know that you talked about, your recent, adventures this last week. Well, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, I had just come back from maternity leave. I went into work for 1 day, and we started the morning out, high fives, coffee chats, and we ended with, please stand 6 feet away from each other and get the hell out of the office.
Oh my goodness.
So I think, we had this problem. I was setting up this design sprint, and at first I was like, you know what? I'm going to wait this out. I'm going to see, we're going to be back. I was like, we've lasted through Zika virus, Ebola, like this thing's not staying, it's fine. And sure enough, we all know what happened. That didn't happen. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this anyways. And I did a bunch of research online. Like, you could probably look at I've got, 2 master's degrees in addition to the bachelor's. I'm very much an academic learning research individual. And when I did this search, gosh, I would have loved if ChatGPT existed back then, from a visual standpoint of putting all the data together. But there was nothing on design sprints whatsoever. But there also wasn't anything on how do I successfully run a virtual design sprint.
That's right.
And what's funny is in the last probably 2 months, the team that created the 5-day actually came up with something, but they just launched it this year, which is like 3 years later. I mean, we're 3.5 years into this pandemic, but again, were an inspiration to this. So like, it's super fantastic, but I wish it would have come out, 3 years ago. So ultimately I just kind of created my own thing. And again, another problem solving thing that was happening is, if you recall, if you've participated in these design sprints, they're really driven on in-person interaction. And again, that doesn't solve global. So now you're talking about two things: a very expensive process that, if you don't have someone internal, could cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, because I've had to pay that before back in the day. And now you've got these 27 people from all over that you're trying to get together for 2 hours. And how's that going to work? And so those were kind of the drivers in this problem I was trying to solve of, can we predict whether or not people are going to pay on time? And so what I did, I actually started off with a half-day method, a 4-hour method, and slowly went down to a 2-hour. And how I got things so succinct is people can stay focused for 2 hours. The stakeholders that you pull in from all over virtually will stay focused for 2 hours when you have it very time boxed. 4 hours, you lose them. 3 hours, you lose them. And I tested this method out. So kind of just trial and error. And that really became the setting stone for this process. And I used to speak at a lot of events. I talked about, the different apps that I was over. I had a journey as well, having kids. So I kind of got out of speaking for a bit. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to start speaking again. And I pitched what I was doing to a few conferences, and every single conference accepted the topic. And so I think in 2022, I spoke at 15 different events on this topic. And that's why I decided to write the book and get it out there in addition to it. So
I don't know if it's a coincidence or it's a matter of having a skin in the game and being involved in different projects. To give you a bit of a context as well, is that before Corona, I was doing design sprint, 5 days, very expensive to your point, very, very energy consuming. And if you exactly, and if you didn't define your goals properly and what you're trying to solve, and you bring in people and you didn't define your task properly, the insights is very useless. And then by Friday you look around tired, not satisfied, and try to basically make sure together as a team keep your spirit high. Hey, no worries, we do another one, we at least learn something here. It could be a very frustrating exercise. So from there, Teresa, then Corona happened. Then I had to do the same thing online. So we started having this multiple days workshops. Of course, given that the remoteness of the situation, we couldn't do 5 days of design sprint. So we have to break it down. We have to decide. We right away, Teresa, we were like, prototyping, you don't need to be there. We do it ourselves. Testing, you don't need to be there. We do it ourselves. Like, we are a design agency, right? But as I continue doing this and sitting behind the computer, Teresa, I was like, there is no way I'm going to sit for 8 hours again or 6 hours again. So from 8, we went to 6, we went to 4. Now, fast forward, 2023, I do not stay for more than 2 hours in a workshop with the clients. Mm-hmm. And when I bump into your books, I was like, hold on a second. She's onto something. So why 2 hours?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. It's funny, I'm just hearing you kind of, and that's the funny thing. When I started speaking at these conferences, I heard from folks all over the world that were experiencing the same thing. And that's really part of like the driver and why I did the book. And So as I kind of get to, why the 2 hours, another thing I didn't talk about, in addition to speaking at conferences, I actually ran 7 workshops last year, 7 to 10. I think I added a couple more. And some of these workshops had folks from like very high profile companies, Amazon, Google, Tesla, like all over. And even they were looking for different methods, to try and have, different way of doing things. And so I think just that radical approach of there's no way that can be done in 2 hours is kind of what the mentality of people that come into these workshops, and then they get out of them and they're like, okay, I see how it can be done. And so why 2 hours is ultimately you can get, like I mentioned, stakeholders in a room focused for 2 hours, and that's a
Got
critical
it.
component. And so, and that was something that I really learned from trial and error of the 4, 3, 2 hours, half day, so forth. But what it really took, you talked a bit about, we could do prototyping on our own. We can do testing on our own. And so through trial and error with this 2-hour design sprint method, the focus is really on the first 3 stages during those 2 hours. So you're empathizing with customers, you're understanding the problem, really agreeing on that problem statement, you're ideating solutions, and then you're sketching. And that is what encompasses those 2 hours. Because what I learned as
Ah,
well is, so prototyping and testing actually don't happen during that 2 hours. And I'll tell you why it's so successful to move it outside of it, which sounds like you came to a similar conclusion. So first of all, I mentioned I'd run over 25-day design sprints before I even started reducing. And the
wow.
last 5-day design sprint I ran was a failure. And we had 2 more failed 5-day design sprints after. And ultimately what I learned is during the first design sprint, the problem was so complex that it was a dashboard, and sounds
Hmm.
simple when you say it out loud, but this was when Tableau was still gaining traction. Like everyone was building custom dashboards at the time. And it just wasn't, that wasn't that available. The integration, wasn't that out of the box at the time. And so with that, those 5 days, we had 30 people crammed in this room. This is pre-pandemic, so everyone's coughing on each other with no worry. And with this method, we came out of that 5 days. We put the prototype. The designer and I were up until 3 a.m. before the day of it, which I was like in more of like a product. I was in a product manager / manager role, and we're up till 3 a.m. We get this prototype ready for testing the next day. 5 of the 10 participants bail. They don't even show up. Another 2 end up sending someone else from their org. So we had 3 out of 10 that could test this prototype. And of the 3 that tested it, they're like, this is garbage. Like, I'm not going to use this. And so we spent 40 hours, 30 people, over $50,000. And the conclusion of that design sprint,
Garbage.
sorry, no. So what do? We spent another $50,000 2 more times to learn the same thing. So I think because at the time that was the approach. It was surely, no, this is how it needs to be done. Follow the method, follow the process, and we'll get the decisions. So after that experience, I basically began to say, well, no, this isn't working. This makes no sense whatsoever. And from an efficiency standpoint, why I think prototyping and testing should be outside of it is, first of all, if we would have had a 2-hour design sprint, we could have learned in just 2 hours and basically virtually almost no cost, because you could do everything remote now, minus the time at work, that design wasn't going to work. So that's kind of the first and foremost thing. We would have saved, almost over 100 hours of time across 30 people and $150,000. So from a time saving,
Wow.
So even if you run a 5-day design sprint, additional prototyping and testing are needed outside of that 5-day, 40-hour allotment.
That's right.
So that's why I moved it out, because it doesn't matter whether it's included or not. You're going to need additional work, and it's still going to be less work than if you had done a 5-day one. And so that was kind of part of the rhyme and reason why I moved it. And most of the time, I'm really lucky at TreviPay. I've got a really stellar team of UX and designers, and we have a design system. I actually just migrated the whole team to Figma over the last couple of years. We moved over from like InVision, Sketch. Like we did the whole movement a couple of years ago. So we use Figma FigJam for all of our
Yes,
collaboration, Figma for the designs. And because of that efficiency created with the collaboration and those tools, they're able to whip out designs in an hour. And myself too. Like if I'm the one that's going to be on, I'm also over the team, so I have to get my hands dirty too. I've had to do a few fast minute designs in 24 hours. So that's the beauty of it, is there's enough technology today where you should be able to complete your designs in, a couple hours. And if you can't,
100%.
yeah, go take some classes on Udemy and learn how to. I mean, that's the biggest thing. So
Wow, there's a lot of insight and that you sort of like unpack in less than a few minutes, and I would like to just sort of take it slow and then go a bit deeper. First of all, to your last point, is I still the fact that you are still hands-on and you can whip up a design when it's necessary. I think it's very impressive and it's very needed. And often when I'm talking to head of product, they're like, I'm talking about head of products or head of designs, the head level. I mean, they were like, they used to be senior like a year or 2 years back, and they refuse to be hands-on in design or in prototyping at least. um, Coming from you, it's such a sobering and humbling message to all the folks that are listening. And there is a lot of product executives listening to this podcast, that you need to stay hands-on around design, around prototyping, around writing tickets, what have you. You cannot separate yourself from the core of the work that you defines your role.
absolutely. I mean, I'm a really, I think, kind of twofold. One, I'm not going to give someone on my team work I wouldn't do myself. And that's
That's
just me
right.
being an empathy driven leader. But
Mm.
two, I also think from a skill set standpoint, you cannot just top down lead. You get so far from the product and the users that you have no idea what's going on. And so, in addition to getting my hands dirty with designs and prototyping, I'm actually also kind of doing a bit of a product role right now for a new line of business. I mean, I just think you have to be able to implement your ideas. You can't just do that with top down leadership. You need to get your hands dirty and you need to talk to customers. I've even sat
Mm.
on support calls and I'll listen to what customers are saying. The
Mm.
angry ones, when they call in, because usually when someone calls in, they're angry. They're not calling to tell you that they had a great time in your product. So, but no, I think it's just so important, and I encourage those leaders that are not doing that today to spend a day in the shoes of your designers, your UX researchers,
Mm.
product managers, and see what they're going through. Because if you're not, you're missing out on an opportunity to really make an impact for the product, the customers, and your team.
Wow. Empathize, define, ideate, sketch. You mentioned that you sort of like squeezed in this part of the design sprint in the 2 hours. So, out of curiosity, getting nitty gritty, when it comes to empathizing, I assume when you are block off the calendar for that 2 hour workshop, you assign your UX research team to conduct those interviews or what have you, and then introduce the insights from those interviews in the workshop. Is that right?
So kind of. So I think yes, and some. So really, here's what's really interesting. So with this method of 2 hour design sprints, it's really catering to both businesses and startups. So from a business standpoint, most technology organizations have some sort of framework in place for user personas, or
Mhm.
they understand who their customers are and could probably summarize it pretty quickly.
That's
So
right.
really what I encourage for those that kind of participate in the workshops or those that are kind of reading the book is, if you don't already have user personas, first and foremost, create your user personas, which to really create a rich set of user personas, you need to interview at least 5 to 10 customers or stakeholders to really make sure you have that right persona. And it's not just a one-time thing. We talked a bit about the international component of making sure that you are really representing who your customer is, not just for the product, but across all, countries that you're representing, not just the United States. And so that's really critical. But for startups, a lot of these startups only have one or two
Yeah.
people. they don't have a UX team, a research team. And so in the book, I kind of implore a couple ways to really get that feedback, to be able to create those personas and concepts to allow you to
Mhm.
empathize, and how to explore, how do I really put myself in the shoes of the customers and be able to kind of aid that in the problem statement for the exercise of the workshop.
Got it. That's fantastic. That's great to know. Problems statement define. You define it within with the team inside the workshops. Is there any tricks or tips that you use? I'm curious to sort of, because I've been in a lot of those workshops and that teams wouldn't align on the problem statement. They go back and forth, being passive aggressive, or like the product, the CPO goes away or come back, or the chief design officer says something here and there. How do you sort of, and also like in the ideation when you want to prioritize on which sketch or which direction you want to go on, how do you ensure that you can have an effective decision making process or prioritization process?
Sure, that's great. So first and foremost, I think it's really how you start the setup. So we talked a bit about the 5-day design sprint method. It's in person. You know, you've got post-it notes everywhere, papers everywhere, markers flying, so forth. You know, and gosh, if that post-it note falls off the wall, you're screwed. You don't know where that thing went.
Yeah.
So let's look at this process. So with this method, everything is done in Figma FigJam. I have a free
Hmm.
template on the Figma FigJam community called 2-Hour Design Sprint. So that's out there for everyone, like that's just for free. And first and foremost, that's number one. Whether you're using that Figma FigJam template or you're building it in Miro, Mural, Envision, whatever your preferred collaboration tool is, use a collaboration tool. Move to that method. That's number one, I think, for the rule standpoint. So with that method in place, usually what I do is I go ahead and I create the problem statement ahead of time of what I think the
Hmm.
problem statement is going
Hmm.
to be. And
Hmm.
I send that FigJam link out, you know, either immediately or, right before, and we look at it together. So collectively as a team, you're not watching me writing on a whiteboard trying to read my handwriting. It's right in front of your face and you're able to go add a comment. And I found that method in general of just everyone watching and agreeing on it, and then they kind of get their little stamp instead of those little stickers. They have their virtual stamp and they're just voting on it. And so you have to go with the 80% rule. If a majority of the group is agreeing on the problem statement, you move forward to the next exercise.
Hmm.
If you as a group are not agreeing on the problem statement, that to me means you do not have the right problem that you're solving. It's either
That's
too
right.
complex or the wrong problem. And so what I would suggest in that situation is you break that into a number of 2-hour design sprints. So
That's right.
maybe you have a subset of problems you need to be solving and you create those focus groups of stakeholders, break them up into those focus problem statements. That's how I would address that.
Fantastic tip. Hmm. Hmm. So if 80% of the group is not aligning on that product statement, that means something is wrong. Hmm. Hmm. Teresa, I need to pause you on this because it says Cain's browser doesn't allow recording. Hmm. Maybe refresh your browser. No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. No. It's being recorded. No worries. Oh yeah, I think so. Refresh it. You may have Riverside open in other tabs. Just remove it if you have. Mm, yeah, it's good. I think yeah. Just remove the other one. Annoying Riverside because you were like so on point with your point. Yeah. Yeah. Do you have other browsers? Yeah, I think the Safari would be a safe bet. Annoying Riverside. Thank you for breaking our flow. Ah, yeah. This is supposed to be the best podcast.
All right. I'm not getting the so
That's good. Yeah, there
as
is
long as
nothing. Okay, cool.
it's on your end, then that's all that matters.
I think we should be fine, but I just didn't want you to like lose that you were like so on point with uh, how you sort of handle prioritization and like defining, and so I wanted to like really not lose it. So maybe if as long as much as you remember, start from there and let's just make sure that we are
problem, the group not being able to agree.
exactly. Yeah,
All right. All right, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm very
No, it's
sorry.
okay. This stuff happens. That's okay. I did a conference a couple weeks ago, and like as a presenter, all I could see was a pink screen, So I had to do my
Oh
entire
my goodness.
presentation from memory. It was so I missed
Cool.
faculty blurbs.
Aisha, it's our producer here. From here, cut it again. Let's go. Thank you.
All right, so let's talk about what to do in a situation when you have a group of stakeholders that isn't agreeing on a problem statement. And it's funny, so that could really be from a number of different situations. One, it is very possible that you have a group of stakeholders from different departments that are already not on the same page. Maybe there's some conflict going on there. So in that type of situation, what I like to have done is kind of have everyone come in and agree to kind of coming in with an open mind for the 2 hour session. Leave your grievances at the door, turn your phone off, and again, your virtual door, because this is sometimes it's actually interesting. I'm doing this method both in person, hybrid, and remote. So I'm doing it all. So leave your grievances at the door or your camera at your desk, type of situation. So so that could be that situation. But when you have a situation where you have a problem statement that the group is not agreeing on, to me, that means the problem statement or problem you're solving is really too complex. So what I recommend doing there is breaking that up into multiple problem statements. And how I would go about that approach is you could really align it to the user personas. So let's talk about that dashboard I was referring to earlier that I spent, 3 5-day design sprints on that ended up being a total failure. So with that method, ultimately what we ended up doing was breaking up those out in a similar fashion. But here's what you do in that instance. So let's say you have an admin of that dashboard. So this will be someone that's going to set up the dashboard and really configure it. They'll handle the users, the logins, everything. So create a problem statement and agree as a group on who the admin is and what problem you're trying to solve for the admin. Next, focus on your power user or super user. So this is going to be someone that's actually using that dashboard or whatever product it is or problem you're trying to solve. They're the ones that are going to be actively using this thing all day, every day. So maybe, this is someone that's going to be downloading reports. They're going to be, maybe they're doing SQL, like whatever it is they're doing in there, they're your power user. And honestly, that's probably should be the focus point of who you focus on anyways, because they're going to be the ones using it all the time. So agree as a problem statement on that power user. Next, maybe you have a manager. That's someone that the power user probably reports to. They probably want a status update once a week. Maybe they want the output of the dashboard, and maybe they want to do a little bit of filtering, but not a whole lot. And maybe they're checking the quality of the work. So define your persona of how the manager is going to be accessing that dashboard. And then last, you probably would have another role of some sort of executive or CEO level, which we all know, no offense to all those CEOs out there, they're never logging into that thing. They might open your email if you send them a copy of the dashboard, but ultimately you're going to have to address them in a different way than you would address. They are the most important stakeholder. However, they might not ever look at it. So how are you going to meet that audience? And then I would break those stakeholder groups out with those different problem statements and run 4 2-hour design sprints. And again, 4 2-hour design sprints is less than 4 40-hour design sprints. So no grievances on spending 8 hours versus, 160. So that's how I would approach that.
And the great thing about this 2 hour design sprint is that as you break it down really nicely, is that you can have multiple streams of design sprint for every personas. And often the Achilles heels of design, a typical design sprint, given that you have to really invest, even for 2 hour, even for the 2 day design sprint, it requires a lot of investment and coordination. It's not easy. That you have to sacrifice certain aspect of the product experience because you don't have enough time, or there's a lot at stakes. But these 2 hours allows you, as you said nicely, like 4 2 hour design sprint means probably you need 1 day and a half to run it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it really just depends on that stakeholder mix. So I think what's challenging is, especially, like, I really like bringing in engineers to my design sprints. And I think there's so much value of bringing in engineers. Obviously you're going to want to have if you have the capability to bring in a designer, a product manager, and other stakeholders. But oftentimes the pushback is when you bring an engineer in for a 5-day design sprint, that's 40 hours they could have spent actually working on the product they're going to develop. Whereas if you bring them in for a 2-hour design sprint, that 2 hours is going to allow them to understand the problem so that when they actually are spending time coding it, they're probably already way ahead where they would have been. In addition to that, you've only spent, that 2 hours versus the 40. And so, really breaking that down allows you to bring in different sets of stakeholders you might not have been able to before. For instance, I not once have ever been able to get a CEO to attend a full 5-day design sprint. They've popped in
That's right.
for no more than an hour, even maybe 15 minutes. So I think with 2 hours, you still might not get them for the two full hours, but maybe you will. But that's the goal, is you want to intrigue them. And I've gone to, some of the CEOs, or maybe it's a CEO of that line of business, depending how you're structured, or maybe you're a startup. But that's the goal, is you want to go to them and say, this is important. I need you there. You're coming to this. No questions asked. And that's going to be much easier to do when you say it's 2 hours versus 5 days. Like, no chance that's happening if it's 5 days.
So another follow-up question I have, Teresa, is that 2-hour design sprint is something that I would like to try. So I would like to purchase the book, learn it, use the template. I know you've been kind enough to give me the free version, but I would like to contribute.
Thank you.
So something that I'm curious here is, if I want to run a 2-hour design sprint, should I hire a facilitator, or should a product executive or design executive run that workshop?
That's a really fantastic question. So part of the driver and why I wrote this book is you can be the facilitator, or you can have one of the product managers or UX designers, do that. And that's part of, that 5-day design sprint, that method that was created by Jake Knapp and the team at Google Ventures. Google is a multi-billion dollar organization. They have a lot of money.
That's right.
And, I run some calculations in the book showing, what it would cost for different levels of organizations, all the way from a Google size versus a startup. And ultimately, that book really does push you towards a third-party model. And when I started out running design sprints back in like 2015, 2016, we would bring in third parties. And after you spend $100,000 with them, they would train you to go do it. But that's ridiculous. What's the point of buying a book and then hiring a third party? And so this method is meant for anyone that picks this book up. I've got it sitting right here on visual. Anyone that picks this book up, they can go execute it, or they could give it to someone on their team to go execute. And that's, I think, the big difference between a 5-day method versus this 2-hour is 5-day methods pushed that a subject matter expert couldn't be the moderator. And you would bring these third parties in, and they would be the ones not knowing anything about your company or customers, trying to understand that in 5 days and tell you what you should do as an organization. And I'll tell you what, I didn't have one successful experience from that situation at all. It was a waste of money. And so with this method, this kind of takes those experiences I've had over, the last 7 or 8 years and says, wait a second, subject matter experts make perfect moderators. In fact, they make better moderators because they're collectively getting the team to understand the problem, agree to the problem statement, and they can vote just like everyone else, unlike traditional moderators. They can vote, and they should be able to vote. It's their product, damn it. Sorry, I didn't mean to curse. But ultimately, they should be the ones that should drive the team to agreement. And I find that works a lot better when you have a moderator that is a subject matter expert. So if you try this process, I recommend you try it 2 ways. I recommend you run one, and you have a product manager run one, or someone else on the team. And I think what you'll find is how easy it is and where you get to in those 2 hours when you look at this agenda. I think you really will with your experience. Like, I'd love to hear when you run it.
Yes.
What you think of it.
One great advantage of 2 hour design sprint, and I really encourage everyone that listening to this is try this, because I've been doing sort of a 2 hour workshops, not in the same way that we go through the empathize, define, ideate, sketch, and it's working. So I really cannot wait to go through a systematized process and see how would that improve our processes at Bonanza Design. The great advantage, and it's a great buy-in for me here, is continuity of the work. That's a big problem I had with design sprint: 5 days, 2 days, 3 days. God knows, there were like design sprint version 4, 2 days and a half. It's just like I lost count how many versions were got out there at the end. Is that continuity? Like, we would go through this massive enterprise of like bringing everyone under the one roof, or under the one workspace, few days, and then that insight generated, no continuity.
Yeah, it's funny you said that. I was thinking back, we were talking about the pandemic and the impact, and the last I ran a 3-day design sprint before the pandemic had happened. And again, this at that time, I think I was like 9 months pregnant and couldn't walk around a whole lot, so that was fun.
Oh my goodness.
So, but I remember running this 3-day design sprint, and for those that haven't run a traditional design sprint, I mean, when I talk about the amount of paper that you have paper everywhere, and it takes you several weeks to even condense all the decisions that were made in it, let alone the feedback you got from the prototype. And I agree. I mean, a lot of the execution out of that, sometimes it's just like, oh yeah, we talked about this as a group, and then it's set aside and not picked up for a while. Whereas when you do this method, everything that you were thinking and everyone on the team is thinking is right there in that Figma FigJam template. And the decision is there also. So you're coming to agreement as a group, deciding it right there. And then you also have a link to go right back to. You're not sitting there trying to write down everyone's handwriting and kind of, trying to reiterate what you think everyone learned during that time period. And so those are some of the efficiencies that just, that's how we move forward with this process. Like, this is the new process, out with the old, in with the new. No one has time to execute multi-day design sprints anymore. We need to be executing and moving faster as organizations. I mean, look at the situation that's going on with ChatGPT right now.
Right.
If you go do a search on your website of how many jobs are predicted to be displaced with ChatGPT, I even actually have a section on ChatGPT in the book, because a hot topic that came up was, can ChatGPT replace UX? UX is expected to grow, 10x by 2050, according to the Nielsen Norman Group. And that's a big conversation that's happening. And I address that in the book, my before and my after of testing ChatGPT, because there used to be a wait list. I couldn't get in initially when it started, and I eventually got in while I was writing. And with ChatGPT, my answer to that is ChatGPT is a yes and. So it's a supplementary set of research that you can use in addition to that. And the reason that is the case is because it for the most part, it's kind of a bit of plagiarism. It's not really citing where it's getting its information. It's really scouring across the entire internet. If you've ever written anything on the internet that is public, ChatGPT is searching across it, and it's not going to give you credit. So as a writer and a podcast editor, anything that is transcribed on the internet is now a database for ChatGPT to go scrape. And so that's one thing a lot of people don't talk about, is how is this data culminated? So one, it is not cited. It is plagiarism if you try to go use it for anything. So I don't recommend anyone do that, especially students out there. But in addition to that, from a UX standpoint, it's going to tell you only what exists out there. Your data is only as good as your database. And ChatGPT isn't telling you what is credible data versus not credible. So if you're building a user persona, you cannot rely on ChatGPT as your only source of data to build that out. You need to go talk to users. You can certainly do initial research or have an idea through that, but do not use that as your validation method for the primary source of data for it.
That's very, very, very touching from you. Thanks for really going there and talk about it, because we have a UX gym training program. There's a lot of folks in there that are very scared about their future and they don't know what to do, or they're hearing about this because, as you said very rightly, as that this AI space is moving so fast, like every 48, 72 hours there is a new thing coming out that we have to pay attention, that potentially could disrupt our workflows. But I think the way you put it out there is very true, that okay, do you want to rely on ChatGPT knowledge, which dated back to November 2021, or do you want to get out there and talk to your folks and people and customers and users now in May 5th, 2023?
Yeah, exactly. It's
Hmm.
2 years. That's a lot. A lot can happen. Look at that. A pandemic. That was mid-pandemic. People are completely different now than they were during that time period of the pandemic.
That's
What a
right.
user was doing at that time was probably getting groceries. Let's just say, let's go to that model. Like you have maybe an app where people are ordering groceries, having them delivered to their house. Whereas in the United States, I would say things are mostly back to normal here for those
Mm-hmm.
that are able to do that. There's some that are not past that stage. And so I think from a user standpoint, those same personas that were ordering groceries to their house, they're back in the grocery store shopping. They're not wearing a mask. And so that's a completely different targeted persona. So if you're relying on ChatGPT for your data, you're going to get the wrong data. And I think that's just really critical to understand. Again, your data is only as good as your database. And what's interesting about ChatGPT is, I mentioned to you that I've actually built a number of machine learning tools in my past, analytics tools, Python. So I'm very familiar with natural language processing and exactly what they're doing, having helped build those myself, back in the day. As well as I've also analyzed IBM Watson, Google Translate. I've analyzed a lot of different machine learning tools in my career. And ultimately, these are training models. It is not fully
Mm.
automatic. There are people manually accepting what people are putting, in the search box to say, is this correct? Accept it. Some of that's automated, but not all of it. They have people validating that. And
Right.
that doesn't just become expensive. Those people that are validating it are probably, analysts with no experience on what they're validating that are feeding into the algorithm. So, I mean, you have to take it with a grain of salt. Now, I will say I've really been trying different things in Chat GPT because I wanna like it and support it. I think it's gonna be something that stays around, especially with this newer generation of UX folks. And so every now and then I'll throw out a question. Like I'll just say, hey, ChatGPT, how would you write this email to a pissed off customer? I actually put that in there yesterday. I said, at a high level, here's what this customer said. There was no PII in it, no mention of anything. Like, this customer is very angry. What would you say back to this customer? And ChatGPT wrote a very lovely email back. So, for that type of stuff, it's nice to see what ChatGPT, its opinion, not their. Well, that's kind of creepy, right? Because we're talking about AI. So, it's nice to see the opinion of what ChatGPT would have. But did I use that email? No, I just used it to see what it would say. Like, should I be wording this differently
Mm.
instead of sending a passive aggressive email? And so that's how I would view it. ChatGPT is another research database for you to go
Mm.
have as an additional stream for your job as a UX researcher, designer, and product manager. But do not use that to encompass everything you do for your job, or you will become very behind, and not maybe hit the right audience.
You have just given the most sobering and practical explanation of why ChatGPT could not become the only channel that UX designers or product manager, what have you, in the product field use to generate insight. I think that's a very, at least the elaboration I've heard in the past month, that makes sense to me, that it's only a research tool and it's only one research tool amongst many. Teresa, I cannot thank you enough. I think I'm going to personally use your 2 hour design to sprint method, and I'm going to talk a lot about it because I feel like I'm if and most likely a lot of design sprint facilitators are not going to like your methodology because you're going to put them out of the work. But I really like your overall speaking, I really like your hands-on approach. You're a product executive that really have a hands-on um, approach in design sprint, and really try to. It's by the sound of it, try to drive results and reduce cost for big organization. I cannot thank you enough for this lovely conversation. Any last word for the audience?
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love that you just kind of talked about results, and I'd love to kind of end it, talking about results. So let's talk about how that ties into everything. And that's exactly what it does tie into, results. So I have, the product design and UX team running over 22-hour design sprints per year right now. And that's been consistent
Wow.
the last 3 years. And again, we were only doing around one or two before then of the 5 day or shorter day methods. And so in
Wow.
addition to that, what's it led to? Even during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had over a 300% increase in user adoption of our portals, and we've had over a 30% increase in revenue. So again, we have to look at all the different data components. We have Google Analytics, we have Amplitude, we have direct feedback. We run over 100, usually over 100. I don't know if we quite hit 100 last year, but we usually run anywhere up to 100 user studies during the year. So this becomes part of that method of, we get direct feedback from a client and we bring it right into a 2 hour design sprint. And then we pull it right into our agile cycle of being able to execute on a 2 week agile sprint, right back into the release. So
Hmm.
that's why you use this. It's not just about being able to solve problems. It's about what results can you get from solving your problem faster and getting it out to your customer quicker. And that is what we've been able to achieve at TreviPay with major success in terms of that growth we've been able to do.
If these numbers are not a convincing case for you to give this method try, I'm going to give this method try, and my client's going to benefit from it, and you get behind. Until the next episode, I thank you. Thank you for listening. Thanks, Teresa, for being gracious enough to be on the podcast. Really love the conversation. I learned a lot. Until the next episode, thank you, folks.